The Trump administration has announced a proposal to let federally funded housing services turn away transgender people. Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson said that the rule would, quote, better accommodate religious beliefs of shelter providers. The proposal overturns an Obama-era rule saying shelters funded by HUD cannot discriminate based on gender identity or sexual orientation. According to the National Alliance to End Homelessness, transgender and non-binary adults are more likely to be homeless than cisgender adults. The proposal comes as protesters have tried to raise awareness about anti-transgender violence in recent weeks. At least 18 transgender people have been murdered this year in the United States. In the month of June, at least 4 Black trans women have been killed. One of them was Mercy Mack. She was murdered last week in Dallas. The 22-year-old trans woman was found shot to death in a parking lot. Sarah Kate Ellis joins me now. She's the president and CEO of GLAAD. Sarah Kate, thank you for joining us.
One of the first moves that the Trump administration was rolling back protections at school for our trans youth. A couple of weeks ago, they removed health coverage under the Affordable Care Act for our trans brothers and sisters. And now they're making a move on denying them shelter in homeless shelters that are receiving government funding. So, there was the military ban. There is the military ban. So this administration from day one has systematically targeted the trans community. As you mentioned, an incredibly marginalized community as it is. There are 18 trans murders that we know of just this year. That's 11 more than last year so far this year. So this is a really marginalized point.
And on that point, even as I was saying that, I was transported back to last year when I was at the Pride Festival covering the murder of additional transgender people that happened last year. So in so many ways, it feels like this story just continues. And as you say, there isn't enough attention. There aren't enough people standing up for a group that specifically would be impacted by this change by the administration. Can you tell us a little bit more about why homeless services are so essential, particularly to trans youth?
Absolutely. So when you look at trans youth, about 40% are homeless. When you look at youth, about 40% homeless youth are LGBTQ because they come out and then they get kicked out of homes. And so we have 40% of the youth who are homeless on the streets today, who are LGBTQ. Of that population, the Trump administration now is saying they can be denied housing. So they will be left on the street to fend for themselves. It is so dangerous for them out there. It is so deadly for them out there. And this administration is knowingly not supporting them and putting them in harm's way, and all under the guise of religious exemptions, where I think we can all agree that anybody, love thy neighbor and take thy neighbor in and help thy neighbor. And so I feel like they're using religion to specifically target a marginalized community, and I don't understand even why. It just seems awful and heartless and mean, quite frankly.
So can you help us understand some immediate steps that need to be taken to protect the trans community from violence, given that we have seen over the years a constant escalation in acts of violence that are reported against the trans community?
So a couple of things. A couple of weeks ago, one thing I do want to point out is within the trans community is that even furthermore, it's Black trans women who tend to be the most targeted and have the highest rates of murder. This community is a community that has high unemployment rates, has high homeless rates, as we mentioned. And so I think it's being an ally, speaking up for the community, employing our trans brothers and sisters, giving them jobs, helping them, giving them a step up, and then advocating, showing up on the streets, marching. A couple of weeks ago during Pride, there was a Black Trans Lives Matter march that a lot of people showed up for in New York and LA. I think the numbers were in the tens and 15,000. And that's really important. So we have to advocate. We have to donate to trans. There are many trans organizations that are helping the trans community. And then we have to help them ourselves with what we have access to, whether it be jobs or homes or a good meal. So I think there are many ways to help. And if you go to GLAAD.org, we have a lot of resources, a number of trans community or organizations that you can donate to and support. And the video that you just showed was by trans woman Daniela Carter, who put together sort of about COVID-19, how Target, already we have a health pandemic, which means that a lot more trans people are living in houses and homes that are not accepting of who they are. And now we're telling them, you know what, you can't live here, but you can't come to a homeless shelter either. So I think what she was looking to do was shed a light on the challenges the trans community has, but also offer hope. This is a resilient community, an amazing community, and one we should look up to.
I want to talk about Merci Mack's story. Her death is the most recent reported trans murder this year. Some police and media reports have used what's called her dead name, the birth name that she was assigned. Talk to us about the impact that using a dead name has on the trans community.
So we call this a double murder, actually, because not only have you been physically murdered, but then your spirit, your legacy has been murdered because you've been identified against your will on not how you want to be identified. So one of the places this starts is actually at the police stations, because they provide the journalists with the information of who was murdered. And so we work very closely with police and local media. And what I highly recommend is always check. And we have so many resources now to us with the internet, with social media, to check and confirm people's names and their pronouns. Asking what are your preferred or your pronouns is a really nice thing to do and an important thing to do, and that we take that for granted in this world. And so I think that dead naming someone is really a double homicide, and that we shouldn't be doing that. And it just takes a little bit of effort to check.
One last question for you. I want to talk more about the protests, raising awareness about Black trans lives. Can you tell us more about how they have been received? Particularly, I've heard from friends who feel like they are suffering from a lack of awareness in both the general community as a Black trans person and and also as LGBTQ more generally within the Black Lives Matter, sometimes feeling resistance from within the Black community as well.
Well, I think that's why it was so significant to have an all Black Lives Matter march weeks ago that was really squarely faced on Black queer people during Pride, because there is a challenge for people of color, LGBTQ people of color, both within the LGBTQ community, which has primarily been run by white cis men historically, and then the Black Lives Matter community, which has been tends to be a focus on Black men. Even though it was started by queer women, the Black Lives Matter, or one of the women who started it, at least one, was identifies as a woman of color and queer. So I think what I see and what I think was beautiful about June was that June was a platform for Pride, and we were able to utilize that moment, that time, that platform to raise awareness, to raise the voices of communities of color who are LGBTQ. And I think those marches both in New York and LA, look, we all have a lot to learn. And if we think we know it all, even myself as president of GLAAD, we all have a lot to learn. We've been brought up, we've been raised in a system and a society that has taught us one way. Our history books are written in one way. And it's on us to learn, to expand, to grow. And I think this is a big moment for that, for growing and learning when it comes to racial justice, when it comes to LGBTQ justice, when it comes to women's rights. This is a moment where we have to really say, I don't know, let me go read about it. And there are tons of resources out there, and there's easy access through the internet.
I agree. I think that, even you and I having this conversation, neither of us being transgender, talking about a marginalized community, we have to admit that we don't know, but there is a position of privilege in which we have to stand up and speak for people who are marginalized. Sarah Kate Ellis, thank you.